Evening, and welcome to our November Lewis Guy History Series program. We are very excited tonight to have someone come to us from Colonial Williamsburg, from the Colonial Williamsburg Foundation. So thank you for signing up. Thank you for being here, and we hope you enjoy the program. A couple of housekeeping things to tell you about ahead of time. You will notice at the bottom of your screen, there is a chat feature and also a Q&A feature. So if you have comments, observations, questions, anytime during the program, just send them in. I will keep track of them and share them with the speaker at the end of the program. Tonight, our speaker is Ted Boscana, who is with Colonial Williamsburg Foundation after a career of 32 years. He's worked in all levels of the Historic Trades and Skills Department and is now director of that department. He started as a journeyman and focused on the architectural finish work of the joiners, which led to the creation of a standalone joiner's shop at CW with Ted as its first master joiner. His work can be seen throughout Colonial Williamsburg and also other sites in Virginia, such as Monticello and Mount Vernon. Ted received his bachelor's degree in liberal arts and followed that with a master's in nonprofit studies from the University of Richmond. He lives in Richmond today with his wife, and on his days off, he enjoys visiting other museums. So it's sort of a busman's holiday. And he told me earlier that he lived in Gloucester for quite some time. So he's a local person, and we're very glad to have him. I will turn the program over now to Ted Boscana, who will talk about historic trades and skills of Colonial Williamsburg. Ted?
Good evening. Thank you, Peggy. Let me get this set up here and share. One more click. There we go. Well, thank you all for attending this evening. I'm very excited to share with you something that I'm incredibly passionate about, the historic trades and skills of Colonial Williamsburg. The pillars that we work to are really the idea of researching, preserving, perpetuating, and presenting the historic trades that were practiced in Williamsburg in the 18th century. And to be able to share this with guests is our great privilege, and to make the connections that people have with both handwork, but also just realizing that these were people in the 18th century practicing these skills, and they're relatable. People still need and practice many of these trades today, although many of them have been modernized and mechanized. We're really showing the roots of what went into building America. The structure of the program tonight, I thought it would be important to talk about kind of where we started, where we are, and where we are going. Looking back to Colonial Williamsburg's history, obviously the museum has been around for some time. As we work towards 2026, we'll be celebrating our 100th anniversary. The Historic Trades Department came along a little bit after that, but when we think about the Historic Trades and Skills Department, again, we exist to connect the modern audiences to their past. We do this by sharing the skills, technologies, and stories of the diverse workers that helped build America. It's those stories that really resonate with guests when they start to make connections to the past and recognize and realize that these are actual, real, living people that were doing this work. For me, one of those moments was in the joiner's trade. Obviously, we have some amazing houses throughout Virginia that have survived through the 18th century. Monticello has always had a special place in my heart. I've done programming with them for a lot of years, but just seeing kind of the reinvention of that house and seeing the work that was taken on there, and then looking to Poplar Forest, you start to hear about John Hemmings. And John Hemmings, of course, Sally Hemings' half brother. You know, when I was reading about John Hemmings, it really seemed as though, you know, this was history in a book. It wasn't until I started reading the letters that John Hemmings had written to Thomas Jefferson when he was doing the work at Poplar Forest. They would correspond back and forth about the work that was being done. When you started to read John Hemmings' words, you know, that meant a couple of things. Obviously, he's literate, but you know, he became more than just a name on a piece of paper. Here was a living person, you know, 200 years removed, but that connection really became much stronger for me. And when I share the story of John Hemmings with guests, you know, I think that came across as well, that there was more of a connection with the work. And that's something that we really are striving to do today at Colonial Williamsburg, as part of our telling the whole story, to tell the full and diverse story of the folks that were taking on this work in the 18th century. But when we look to Colonial Williamsburg and we look at the history of trades at Colonial Williamsburg, from the 1930s, there was really a consideration to think about bringing in some type of craft program. And in 1936, the Restoration formed the Williamsburg Craftsmen Incorporated, which was a wholly owned subsidiary of Colonial Williamsburg. In October that year, the man in the picture at the top next to Winston Churchill, that's Kenneth Chorley, who was the first president of Colonial Williamsburg. He announced the reestablishment of authentic handcraft industries. And by October of 1937, you have the first shops opened. These shops were not originally meant to be necessarily interpretive areas, but really were to focus on kind of showing the work as it was being done. The first shop that opened up was the blacksmith shop, and that was being operated by Boone Forge of North Carolina. They operated that blacksmith shop out of the old Dean Forge. And Peggy shared with me earlier that she has a horseshoe that she got during a visit when she was younger. More than likely, that would have been made down at that old Dean Forge. The second outside vendor essentially that came in to show work was Kittinger Furniture of Richmond. And they presented the cabinet shop at the Askew House, which is currently where our gunsmiths reside. But the first trade that was shown there was the cabinet making. Then there was some pewter being sold and jewelry at the Margaret Hunter shop, which is where currently our milliners reside. And in 1939, though, moving on, the shops were furnished as typical craft shops of the 18th century, and their function became the same as exhibition buildings. So really, the focus became more than just production. We started to see the idea of let's introduce some interpretation. As we make our way through time, World War II was a really tough year for the peninsula in general and the United States. But for Colonial Williamsburg, it actually brought on the first closing of many of these trade shops. They closed down in 1942. And it wasn't until 1948 that the craft shop programs began to start to pick up again. And the idea of interpretation became much stronger at that point. They actually become part of the Department of Interpretation. And that's really kind of the origins of our craft program as we have today at the museum. The 1957 annual report said that the crafts program essentially is part of a broad experiment to reveal 18th century Williamsburg in light of human personalities, to make modern visitors truly feel the companionship and presence of the people who proclaim the rights of man in words and deeds. no American should ever forget. The program kept growing, kept picking up, and by the early 1970s, we were showing 36 different crafts, and there were 73 craftspeople and 60 interpreters working in the department. By the late 1980s, the craft department changed its name to the Department of Historic Trades to better reflect the use of the 18th century terminology. When we talk about the terminology, trade, skill, craft, as far as trade and skill, the way that we're currently defining it is that the trades are physically able to reproduce objects that still exist from the 18th century. So we can go into our collections, look at a piece of furniture, and have someone make a reproduction of that using the same types of tools and technologies available, and ultimately comparing the old one side by side with the new one and seeing how that work was completed. How close is that copy? There gets into some debate and working very close with our curators over the years. You get into this philosophical debate of, is it the right thing to reproduce the mistakes when clearly somebody cut on the wrong side of a line and one thing is off from the other? It just depends on what the purpose of reconstructing that piece is. So I have reproduced things with the same mistakes in them. I have tried to correct things and made the same mistake that was made 200 years ago and realized that's how that mistake became apparent in the original. So it's always interesting to kind of think about, what is the function, what is the purpose as we start to take on those different projects. But with the trades, we can generally categorize them into woodworking, metals, fashion, and food. And food is kind of broad, but that would encompass everything from our foodways program, who cooks in the Palace Kitchen and at the Armory Kitchen. But that could also be the folks that are growing crops, our farmers, and also our garden staff. Skills is kind of an interesting term, and it really, we merged the two together, trades and skills. I think it was around 2013 that we brought those two together. Our skills, are very technical practitioners. It's just they don't have original objects necessarily that they can reproduce. Our musicians certainly, can perform 18th century music, but to our knowledge, there is no existing recording of any type of 18th century music. So being able to compare how it's being played obviously doesn't quite work out. Our military staff, again, very highly trained individuals that can talk to you all day about tactics and different modes of battle and really all the different campaigns that took place during the American Revolution. But again, besides looking at the manuals and understanding the drill, we really don't have something that we can show as a tangible thing to compare the work that they're doing. And the same can be said with our apothecary staff. Again, highly knowledgeable in 18th century medicine, but we're clearly not mixing those things up for distribution today. So with the trades and skills combined, it really has offered us an opportunity to kind of really rethink how we have our trades structured. And so with the trades department and also working with our skills colleagues, both are working to produce curriculum. Our trades all have a 5-level curriculum that's in place that focuses on, again, those pillars that are so important for us of research, perpetuating the trade, preserving it. And to accomplish that, at different levels of their curriculum, there are different expectations. One thing that has really changed the structure and our focus has been the pandemic. So as we start to look at COVID-19 and thinking about how so many institutions had to close their doors, Colonial Williamsburg was not spared from that. We certainly shut down for almost 3 months. And during that period of time, we really had an opportunity to use that as a pause and kind of rethink how we were presenting our programming. We basically, in the matter of a few days, went from on-site programming to fully virtual programming. We had been doing some of this prior to the pandemic. We did have our Trades Tuesday program, which were live streams that we still have on Facebook, and they've been very popular to date. I think we have about 66 of those videos from the different trades and skills. So that has been a really nice thing. But learning how to work with that technology, learning how to best show the work that we're doing when folks are not, right there with us. This has certainly been a learning learning opportunity for us. We also have been able to really heighten the focus on research, and we've had numerous blogs that have been created by staff taking the opportunity to research independently and to further along the shared knowledge of the department. And while we were closed, some staff did come on site. We took the opportunity to paint a lot of fences and make repairs. So we did have a small amount of staff that were coming in to do that work. And we had some staff, I put this picture of Matt Sandberry's Facebook post. If you're working from home, remember to put out your flag, because that's how we indicate what buildings are open in the historic area. Well, Matt is one of our carpenters. He took his drawbench home and proceeded to make shingles right there out in his front yard. Those shingles will be used in buildings that we'll be reconstructing on site. And we'll talk a little bit more about those in just a few minutes. As I mentioned, of the videos that we've been producing, we have 66 videos that have been produced. You can find them on Colonial Williamsburg's YouTube channel. We're also sharing them on a couple of other streaming services. I believe Vimeo is one, but the YouTube channel is certainly easy to navigate. If you search Colonial Williamsburg on YouTube and then look for historic trades within the Colonial Williamsburg page, you'll find all of these that have been put out. So Tuesdays at 1 o'clock. We were doing them every week. We are spreading them out, and it's going to be every other week. So the next one will be next Tuesday at 1 p.m. And that one will be focusing on harpsichord, some harpsichord playing. So this has really been an opportunity for us to kind of reset our focus, take this opportunity to kind of look at our programming. And one of the things that became obvious is that we were, with Black History Month and Women's History Month, we were trying to draw focus to minority groups during those heightened months of the year. But just this fall, we've actually launched 2 new walking tours. Voices of Their Hands explores the lives of enslaved tradespeople. And Allende Martin on the left there has led that team and has really been instrumental in kind of putting this tour together. The tour, Women at Work, explores the women's role in the 18th century beyond the household. Chris Strum has really led the charge with that program. And both of these programs, the interpreters are sharing the laws and the customs that impacted the work of both of these groups, as well as talking about individuals and really, again, sharing the stories of those folks that, just often were not given voice to. So we're really working to try and make sure that we allow them to have some voice in the 18th century narrative. We also have projects that are coming up. One of the next major things for our trades department is the relocation of the brickyard, which will be relocated to Botetourt and Nicholson Street. And the front half of that property will be the carpenter's yard, and on the back half of that property is where the new brickyard will be set up. In the spring, we'll also have Ewing Field. You can see Ed Schultz working with a horse there to help plow. Ewing Field will be where the windmill will also be relocated. So on that site, we'll be able to talk about farming as it was practiced historically in the 18th century. Eventually, we'll be able to talk about the windmill and that pursuit of science, and really hopefully get into some STEM discussions, especially the school groups, to further along the notion that people have been trying to manipulate the power of wind since the ancient times. The Historic Trades and Skills Institute, which I have a note about there in the center, is really something that we have been talking about working towards for some time. The Historic Trades and Skills Institute is really a natural extension of Colonial Williamsburg's mission to continue to help those learn from the past. And what we have really seen with the idea of this Historic Trades and Skills Institute is imagine an educational opportunity in which students not only learn the how of a skill, but also the why from an authentic practitioner of the trade. Our artisans are extensively trained in the handcrafts, and through their research will propel this depth of knowledge to new heights. Colonial Williamsburg is the home of what we call the original makers. We started using America's First Makers to really kind of push out this idea that there's really not a whole lot new under the sun. People have been interested in using their hands. What we're seeing, though, is today there is often considered a disconnect between, with all the technology that's available out there, there's actually been kind of a makers or crafty movement that's been occurring really for the last dozen years or so. We just really want to be able to extend our knowledge out into that community and really help to continue to share this knowledge in other ways. A goal of mine would be to build out this institute in such a way that people would come for the Trades Institute and also have the opportunity to enjoy Colonial Williamsburg, this wonderful living history museum that would be associated with it. But what we're going to start with is fairly small ideas. And with the Trades and Skills Institute, starting in the spring, we'll start to be rolling out some workshops. The workshops during the spring break period, which is, we're really kind of considering the first 3 weeks of April. Excuse me. As spring break, we're going to be offering a family workshop. And really, when you start to create a program and you start to think about, we want to get kids involved, we want to get parents involved, this idea of a multi-generational workshop is a little bit daunting. But what I noticed when we were doing, we had a program called the Young Apprentice Tour, and we gave young folks the opportunity to come and work on the other side of the rope or behind the bench and work on something small and to have that opportunity to take that with them when they completed it. Um, the parents were very eager and anxious to also try and participate in this. So that idea of this family workshop was kind of born out of that. We really want to make sure that we can engage everyone in the group and in a meaningful way. We're also going to be offering beginners level workshops once we get past that first 3 weeks in April. So we'll have a combination of some family workshops and some of these beginner level workshops. Our goal would be eventually to start offering an intermediate level with some of these things. These first two experiences that we're talking about really are probably in the hour and 15-minute range. And it's really important for me with the family one, especially, that we try and keep the ticket cost as low as possible. So we're really just trying to cover the cost of the workshops without necessarily looking to make profit. That's not the function of that. It's really to give those that want to engage with the trades in a deeper way an opportunity to do that. One thing that we saw in some of the programming that we've done for the last 23 years, we've had a woodworking conference, but only in the last 5 or 6 years have we started to offer an opportunity for workshops before and some after the conference. And we sell out every one of those. But of course, we've got a very engaged audience that's coming for that particular workshop. Well, with this workshop, last year we did it completely virtually. This year's will be a hybrid. We'll be offering in-person and virtual opportunities for folks to participate. What's really great about this this woodworking conference is that I always tell folks it's almost like a woodworking cooking show. So you have basically for some presenters it's an hour, some presenters it's 2 hour-and-a-half slots, but from that experience, you're really trying to take people through almost the entirety of the process of making something. So you have to have almost the pie building, but then you want to be able to pull the finished pie out at the end of the program to show folks what it's going to ultimately work out to be. So with that, this is really nice in that we've done this program. This year we had the year in the photograph here. That's Brian Weldy at the lathe. We had done this in the Williamsburg Lodge, but generally we do this right in the Art Museum, in the Henage Auditorium. And it gives folks an opportunity to explore the collections and being able to bring the original pieces out that we are making reproductions of, and giving folks access to get close and see these things, I think is really really helped with the success of this program. So that's kind of very quickly going through where we are, where we want to be. We, as an institution, Colonial Williamsburg has a lot of things kind of in the hopper. I don't know if you've all heard about the Bray School, which was a school that was established for educating African-American children. That has been recently rediscovered at the College of William and Mary, and it is going to be moved within the historic area. We also have the First Baptist Church, Black Baptist Church, which is been discovered just recently. They unearthed and are pretty sure that they have found the actual original church. There was a later church built on top of the same location. So the archaeology was very complicated as they worked through it, but they feel very confident that they have actually unearthed the original site. As I talked about Ewing Field moving, we're also going to be working to move our colonial garden. The colonial gardening or historic gardening program will be moving next to Ewing Field. So you'll be able to see both horticulture and agriculture, crops that are being grown for tobacco, corn, crops that were grown generally for export. And then with the garden, you can see an example of a gentleman's pleasure garden. So kind of a nice contrast, obviously both growing things, but to different ends. We have started work on the powder magazine. There's been a major exploration of that building on the interior. They've discovered that there were windows in different places. They've been doing archaeology around the interior of the wall, and they feel pretty confident that they've located a couple of foundations for other structures that were inside that wall. So that's going to be another project that we'll be taking on. So marching from here to 2026, Colonial Williamsburg's 100th anniversary, we've got so many exciting projects that are really going to be important to discuss and to explore. And for historic trades and our skills department, you know, we are the ones that are going to ultimately help to reconstruct that those buildings and lend hand to bringing these things back to life. That's really what I have enjoyed in my time. Again, Peggy mentioned that I apprenticed and have really worked at every level within the department. My apprenticeship started out in carpentry and joinery, and my journeyman project was one of the outbuildings on the Peyton Randolph property. Every time I walk by that building, you know, I get a little excited to see that it's still there, and I've helped put some of that history back where it belongs. But having had the opportunity to work on many of the reconstructed buildings that we've taken on over the last 25 plus years, it's a really nice feeling. My grandfather was a brick mason in Baltimore, and I remembered as a child driving through the city with him and him pointing out buildings that he had laid bricks on, and you know, you could see that, you could sense that pride in his voice. I get to do the same thing when I take guests and family through Colonial Williamsburg, pointing out things that I've helped put back that have not survived over the last 200 years. So that's part of the magic that you know is really drives us, and the passion for the work is we are creating something that will hopefully endure and last for generations to come. I'm going to leave you all with this little video that I think is a really kind of nice summary of what we do and what we try to engage with as far as meeting our guests and delivering an experience that will make memories for them as well. All right. The last thing I just want to leave you with is my contact information here. So I go by Ted, but my given name is Edwin. So if you need to contact me in the future, if you have questions, eboscana@cwf.org. And I do want to take this one more, I just want to do one more thing here. I want to take you all to the Colonial Williamsburg homepage. If you want to know about the trades, you can go to Explore here, go down to the historic trades on that banner. It'll pull up our main page. And then within those, if there's a particular shop that you're interested in visiting, not only when you click on these will it give you the location and information, but it will also show the hours here because, well, and the carpenters probably aren't the best one to show you because they're open 7 days a week. But in order to give our staff enough time to do the research that's necessary for some of the shops, we've been closed an extra day a week just to give them the opportunity for a dedicated research day. So that has been something that we've been committed to making sure that staff gets the time to do the research they need in order to further the trade along. So I just wanted to show you all that. And again, within all of these pages, you know, they attach to some video, they'll attach to some of the YouTube videos as well. And if you want to set up an itinerary specific to wood, or in this case, do-it-yourselfers, you can click on there and it will help you kind of build a visit. So I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing now. And I'm happy to take any questions.
We had one question from a participant who asks about textiles.
Yes.
We know that a lot of textiles were imported, many from England, but what about weaving, local weaving? Was that one of the trades that?
We do. We have a weaving shop, and our weavers are actually showing both, well, the three trades of weaving, spinning, and also dyeing. And they're looking at potentially exploring some other finishing of fabrics, but you're exactly right. The majority of the finer fabrics were certainly being imported from England. It's really what leads us into the Industrial Revolution. That's also one of the things that we really try to make sure we stress to folks is that, you know, the trades that we're showing, this is really the last generation of people that did their work kind of in a pure hand way. They were not necessarily impacted by the Industrial Revolution, which is coming very quickly. You'll start to see some specialization, well, early on in England, but really it's not as impactful here in the colonies until we get into the next century. So textiles, you know, again, that's a big area where that Industrial Revolution will completely change the way that work is undertaken.
Can you comment briefly on that, the Industrial Revolution and how it changed? I know we're getting off topic, but.
No, that's great. So the one of my favorite talking points in the shop when I was working as a joiner was, you know, that was always one of my favorite questions was, you know, what is a joiner? Because, you know, they look like woodworkers. And to simplify it and say, well, joiners were finish carpenters, you know, that kind of dumbs down the work that they were taking on. What you would see in England is you wouldn't find necessarily somebody that was even just a joiner. You would find a door joiner or a sash joiner. And as you move towards the idea of the Industrial Revolution, what starts to happen is that you're not necessarily learning the whole of the operation, you're starting to learn part of the operation, which means your skill becomes so specialized that the only place that you can practice that is really in that factory type environment. So imagine learning how to build the left part of a window sash, or taking it to an even greater extreme. The description of making a straight pin, where they describe 14 steps in the making of a straight pin, and then having one person doing each of those individual steps. And we
Wow.
certainly think about the assembly line, we make attributions to Henry Ford, but the idea of the assembly line is well in existence by the end of the 18th century. It's just not moving yet. That's really kind of one of the big innovations that Henry Ford brings to it. But you certainly do see, with the population density in big cities, Birmingham, Sheffield, London, you'll start to see a great amount of specialization occurring there, to really try and minimize the numbers of people that they're competing with. Whereas the story on this side of the pond is the opposite, especially in the 18th century, where you don't have as big a market. You're really limited to selling things fairly locally. So you find people here really start to diversify. And when you get out into the countryside, instead of being a joiner, I might be a joiner who is framing houses occasionally, getting into doing some of that carpentry work, maybe taking on some finer furniture. Certainly think about the joinery at Monticello, where Jefferson wouldn't have hesitated to take some fancy piece of French furniture that he brought back with him and take it into that shop and say, make me a copy of this. And if they can pull off that level of work, then where is that distinction between cabinet maker, joiner, carpenter, all breaking down.
You mentioned your apprenticeship as a joiner. How long does an apprenticeship last until you become full-fledged? Or
yeah, you become a journeyman. So today we have a 5-level curriculum. When I was in the program, it was 6 years, and I think that somewhere between 5 to 7 years is really kind of the expectation for most of our current apprenticeships. As far as how people apply for them, or how many people apply for them, it really depends on the trade. We do a nationwide search when we post for these positions, trying to get candidates from trade schools, from whatever kind of specialized interest groups that may yield that. But I would say one of the most competitive areas are the fashion trades, because I think there's still so many people that are hand sewing. So when it comes to hiring for our milliners or tailors, it wouldn't surprise me to have 100 applicants for one apprenticeship. The reality is that we just don't have that many positions coming open. And so what I like to think about within the trades department is that we have folks that come to Colonial Williamsburg and they might be here for a year or two, or then we have people that come here and they work here for a career. My master, who I trained under, Garland Wood, who's the master carpenter, is going to be retiring soon, and he'll have over 40 years. And that's not a unique story. We have many of our masters and senior journeymen that are pushing 30 plus years at the museum. And I think what keeps people at the museum is the support, but also it's the idea that we're not in a factory. We're not, certainly we have deadlines that we put on ourselves to accomplish certain tasks. But I remember when I was building one of my first kind of bigger pieces of furniture, which was a 17th century New England court cupboard that we were building to coincide with the 2007th anniversary. And so I started out with a log for most of that project and hand split out the parts and pieces, and ended up spending about 700 hours in the construction of that piece. And then I got to where I was ready to put the finish on it. Well, in doing the research for the finish, I was trying to recreate an 18th century oil varnish. Um, what I quickly came to realize is that what made the 18th century oil varnishes work so well was the fact that they would use red lead as a dryer or cicative in the oil. Clearly there are certain parts of the 18th century that we're not interested in recreating, using lead being one of them. So I was looking for other 18th century alternatives to lead, and I could not find a dryer or cicative that ended up being as effective. So I ended up starting with just a modern boiled linseed oil, which has some type of heavy metal in it as a dryer. And we were heating the oil, and every recipe that I read from the 18th century said to heat the oil, to heat it outside, well away from your shop. And what I learned very quickly in my experimentation is that it takes a little bit more than 2 fire extinguishers to put out a gallon of linseed oil when you catch that pot on fire. But we eventually came to a recipe that worked, and I ended up cooking about 25 batches of varnish before I got something that worked. What we are trying to do now, as we go through and try and rediscover and relearn these processes, is to make sure that we document the process, so that 20 years down the road, somebody that has to make an oil varnish again doesn't have to start from scratch.
There's a whole story behind the fire extinguishers, right?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Yes. Yes.
It brings to mind how many of your colonial predecessors had similar experiences.
Yeah.
I know many of us who grew up here remember going to Colonial Williamsburg on field trips in elementary school and having the gingerbread cookies from the Raleigh Tavern and the horseshoes that you mentioned. Do you still get a lot of school groups coming? I know they've cut down a lot on travel, but
yeah, I mean, they're starting to pick back up. We saw some this summer. We've seen some coming in this fall. The numbers look better for next spring, but we'll see. We'll see what happens. But we are really trying to build our online presence as well. And that is a goal of Cliff Fleet, who's our new president. He said in a meeting not too terribly long ago that we're already the world's largest outdoor living history museum. A goal for him would be to also be the world's largest online living history museum. So that means really kind of continuing to produce content. We've got again a lot of blogs that are being generated from this research that folks are doing, but also the online content with live streaming as well.
Any other questions? I do not see any. Ted, thank you so much. It was fabulous. It makes me want to go up to Colonial Williamsburg for a weekend and enjoy it. And I'm going to check out your website, see what other programs might be available. We're so glad we can't have our programs in person. We're so glad about Zoom and that you're fluent in Zoom. So we thank you so very much for your program. I will tell you, there I am. Next month, on December 8th, Wednesday, December 8th, our speaker will be John Stahl from the Great Bridge Battlefield and Historic Waterways Foundation. John will be talking about the Visitor Center and Museum at Great Bridge, the battle that took place on December 9th. Anniversary will be one day after his presentation. So we're sticking to the 18th century next month. John has also been doing a lot of research on individuals who fought at the Battle of Great Bridge, among them John Marshall. And he will be talking about some of the individuals who fought there, what became of them afterwards, what future contributions they made to American history and American patriotism. So you'll be getting a notice about that in your email, and we hope you'll join us next month. Until then, happy Veterans Day, happy Thanksgiving, and we'll see you in December. Thanks so much for joining, and good night.